That is a nice way of looking at it. We normally, in our household, we try and tell the Christmas story through December to the children. And when our children were younger, I asked them that when the two older ones were younger, I asked them, okay, so what do you think Mary, the mother of Jesus, was doing for the baby? And they put up their hands and said, I know what she was doing. She was changing diapers and bathing the baby. Okay, and what do you think Joseph, the daddy of the baby, was doing for the baby? And she put up her hand and said, he took the baby to Mombasa. Does that tell you the roles, the way they perceive the daddy and the mommy is doing all the mundane tasks, and the daddies are doing all the fun stuff, exactly. So professionally, as you heard, I'm a journalist with Standard Newspaper, and I report on property, lifestyle, women issues, and human interest stories. I'm also a student at Daystar University, I've been finalizing for a while, a master's in media studies. Okay, do you feel like you know me a bit? Okay, good. So, question of the day. If you had a blank check, you know it's Christmas, eh? And God decided to bless you, and He gave you a blank check, what are the 3 things you'd invest in so that you become a success in life? Shall I repeat that? It's Christmas time. God had decided to remember you, and He's given you a blank check. What are the 3 things you'd invest in so that you become a success in life? All right? Please share this with your neighbor. Please note the 3 things, and as we'll be coming back to these things that will make you a success in life. Last week, we started a new series titled, This Changes Everything. Through the series, we look at different narratives told during the season of Christmas and try to understand the impact they have on us. As we do so, one simple event that has potential to change everything, there's one simple event that has potential to change everything about us. An event that God sent His Son into the world to become the center of history. It's important to remember that Christmas isn't about the most wonderful time of the year just because of what is happening around us. We've been told there are 3 things. There's fun, family, what was the third one? And food that happens around this time. And some of you may be traveling, and others may be traveling into the country, others leaving the country. But what is most important about the Christmas season is what happened 2,000 years ago. Christmas is a reminder that Jesus came into the world to be the light that overcomes our darkness. As was said in the worship team today, Jesus is the reason for the season. Whenever we talk about the Christmas story, majority of us remember the story of baby Jesus in the manger and the wise men and the joy that surrounded his birth. And I dare not forget the shepherds. Did you see how they were represented in the video? But there's another character that has been associated with the story of Christmas thousands of years later, and we don't think much about him. In fact, we dismiss him because we see his part of the story as irrelevant and negative. And this is King Herod, aka Herod the Great. Today, I would like to talk to you about King Herod because I believe there's a little King Herod in all of us. If you're not familiar with his story, don't worry, I will give you a sneak preview of his life. King Herod was the king of Judea in the time that Christ was born. He was only partly Jewish and was not part of the Davidic family line, which of course drove all the Jewish people crazy and was never quite accepted by the Jewish people. He was very smart, very talented, politically astute and very ambitious, and held his power for more than 30 years. He was known in that day and age as a builder. He supervised the renovation of the Jewish temple, making it much larger and more beautiful, which won him popularity with the Jews. He built fort cities, he built aqueducts, he built all kinds of things, including various pagan temples. He was an extraordinary person when it came to his talent, but his ambition got the best of him in the end. However, this king was ruthless. He was an evil man who murdered many in his own family. His only loyalty was to himself. He was obsessed with controlling and growing his kingdom and establishing his legacy. He was determined to always have a successor from his family sitting on the throne of Judea. He killed one of his 10 wives. I don't know how one gets to kill their wife. He must have been very cold-hearted, and executed the sons whom he thought were unfit to succeed his throne. He changed his will 4 times. He would identify a son to succeed him, then decide, no, you're not the right son to be the king. And he would change his will and then have that son executed. You can imagine what the headlines would have looked like. King Herod murders another son. He murdered many rabbis in Judea to the point that rabbis didn't even want to come anywhere close to the city of Jerusalem, lest King Herod got furious and got them killed. The story of Herod the Great is mentioned in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1 to 22, and Luke chapter 1, verse 5. When we get to the biblical narrative about the birth of Jesus, King Herod is about 70 years old, and he's battling a painful kidney disease. He's also consolidating his power and ensuring that the next generation carries on his legacy. And then, Herod the Great, this great and mighty king, the builder, gets the most disturbing news imaginable. In Bethlehem, which is just 8 miles away, there is a new king of the Jews. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1 to 3, it says, Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men, these were royal astrologers, tradition says they were men of high position, from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem asking, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We have seen his star as it arose, and we have come to worship him." Herod was deeply disturbed by their question and was all of Jerusalem. From King Herod's research from the wise men, he learned the exact time they first saw the star. He estimated that this child would be in their toddler years, probably walking or cruising on furniture. Why would a toddler be such a threat to this great king? Remember, King Herod is now an old man. He's ailing and he's in pain. And suddenly, his legacy and his future and his control of the kingdom is at risk. All that he has labored to build is at risk. King Herod knew he was not the rightful heir to the throne of David. And if Jesus really was an heir, there would be trouble in the kingdom. As a smart guy, he tries to control the situation by lying to the wise men. Matthew 2, verse 8 says, "Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child. And when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too." This is what he told the wise men. We all know this wasn't true. Herod did not want to worship Christ. He was trying to be politically correct. On the other side, the wise men, the astrologers, guided by the star, found a baby Jesus in Bethlehem. They brought expensive gifts, not diapers and wipes, but they brought gold and frankincense because they were worthy presents for a future king. They not only brought gifts, but they worshipped him for who he was. These men were from faraway lands, yet they recognized Jesus as a Messiah when most of God's chosen people in Israel did not. Now, this word worship in modern day means singing, like what Webby did, but that's not exactly what the astrologers did. Worship is recognizing that you're in the presence of someone who should cause you to have awe, and then essentially doing whatever you need to do physically or mentally to surrender yourself and submit yourself to them. So these wealthy, wise men, astrologers, honorables, so to speak, who had traveled a long distance, dropped to their knees and worshiped the toddler king because of who they believed this baby was. This is the essence of true worship, honoring Christ for who he is and being willing to give him what is valuable to you. I want to repeat that. It's honoring Christ for who he is and being willing to give him what is valuable to you. They brought gold, they brought frankincense. They were not cheap gifts. We worship God because he's a perfect, just, and almighty creator of the universe, worthy of the best you have to give. Meanwhile, King Herod is a worried man. He realizes that he has been outsmarted by the wise men. The wise men had gone home another direction because God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. Due to his personality, it was dangerous for King Herod to be disturbed. When he got furious, people died. People suffered. So with his fists clenched, racked in pain, he's determined not to bow to anyone. He is not about to worship anyone or anything, and most certainly not a toddler. But King Herod is a master controller. No matter what happens, he would boldly and craftily figure out a way to control the outcomes. And once again, he schemed on how to outsmart destiny. Do you know those kind of people? Are you that kind of person? So King Herod gave an order to his soldiers to kill all the boys who were 2 years old and below. And so they did. One horrible morning, or one horrible afternoon, or one horrible evening, his soldiers rolled into the tiny town of Bethlehem and went into every single house and every single hut and the surrounding area, every farmhouse, and pulled out all the toddler boys and murdered them in front of their families. What a tragedy. Can you imagine the headlines the next morning? Or if it was in today's social media, would we casually or carelessly post graphic and bloody images, oblivious of how they affect the victim's relatives or next of kin? Always remember, a mother, a sister, a brother is seeing those traumatic graphic photos you're posting, and they will forever be etched in their memories. Historians say that within the same year, Herod died a painful death because of the kidney disease. In fact, it was so painful, he had tried to commit suicide. And just as he was killing himself, his cousin walks in and saves him. And that meant he continued to suffer. Just before he died, Herod gave a command. He said, I want you to round up all the wealthy, influential, distinguished men in Jerusalem, imprison them, and in the hour I die, you execute them, so that somebody else will be mourning on the day that I die. Isn't that a sadist kind of person? You see, even on his death, he wanted to control the reaction of people around upon his death. When Herod died, they went against his orders and instead released all those influential men. And in this little twist of history, Herod the Great, as he was popularly known, the great builder, became a footnote in the story of the toddler he tried to kill. Indeed, King Herod will not be forgotten. He will be remembered not for the magnificent temple or seaport or aqueduct he built. In our current setting, we would have probably featured him on the cover page of Architectural Association of Kenya or on the property show with Nancy Modoni, but instead, he is remembered as Herod the Butcher. And can you imagine trying to explain to him on his deathbed, dear King, I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is that 2,000 years from now, people will still be talking about you in languages you cannot imagine and in places that haven't been discovered. People will be reading your story, liking and disliking, sharing your story. The bad news is that if we were to tell you that in the story, you'll not be the main character. You will be a sidebar of the story of the toddler who became the king, who became the savior of the world, who became the deliverer. King Herod was so close to the Messiah, yet so far. Just 8 miles close to his neighborhood was the birth of the Son of God, and he missed his chance, his opportunity to worship the Lord and to get deliverance. Fast forward. 80 years later on, Jesus has performed his miracle, he's finished his ministry on earth, he died on the cross, rose again, and ascended to be with the Father. Caesar is long gone, Tiberius is gone, Nero is gone. The temple that Herod built has been totally destroyed. So all the work that he has put building the temple is all gone. We all have a little King Herod in all of us. Think about the kingdom you're trying to build. Think about the 3 points you stated that would make you a success. Think about that career you're building, the business, the education you have poured all your resources into. Think about what you'd have purchased with your open-ended check. If your kingdom, in quotes, was taken away and destroyed, what would be left of you? I'd like you to use your notepad, whether it's a hard copy or soft, to illustrate this. Now, the 3 things you represented, put them as zeros. And you can add 3 other zeros that will make you a success. What might that be? Things that will make you a success. What might they be? Sorry? What was that? Sport pesa. Something else? Education, yeah. Investments, okay? So you put your 6 must-have things to make you successful in the form of a zero. Now, here is what it is, that all those things are vanity. By themselves, all those things are vanity. And Daddy Owen, the musician, says in his song, Hiyo yote ni vanity. Now, in front of those zeros, I want you to put the number 1. How many zeros do you have? 6. Okay, put 1 at the beginning. What does it become? 1,000,000. Now, that 1 represents God. When we put God first in our lives, then all the other things are added to us and their value. When you remove God when you remove the number 1, all those things become nothing, meaningless. And King Solomon says it's like chasing the wind. Last week, you looked at the story of an eyewitness, John, the disciple that Jesus loved. He was an old man, exiled in an island. His friends had been killed, murdered in the most cruel way. The disciples had been killed in a very cruel way. And yet, in the midst of his darkness, he remembers all that Jesus had done, though he had witnessed the miracles. He had watched Jesus die on the cross. Jesus had delegated his mother to John, the disciple. And this is what this disciple says. In John 1, verse 4-5, the Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. I wonder what your darkness is. I wonder what your darkness is. Is your darkness unemployment? Could it be a chronic illness, a failed grade in a core course, or is it unfaithfulness or betrayal from a spouse or a fiancé? Perhaps you lost a loved one and yet you prayed for healing. I don't know what your darkness is. Yet John says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. And that brings us to you. What will your story be? What will your story be in relationship to the light of the world? Will it be Herod's story, a story of resistance? Or will you take your cue from the wise man? Will you honor God for who he is and be willing to give him what is valuable to you? Will your story be that you spent your whole life like Herod, trying to build a kingdom, your career, your family, your talent, your gifting, your abilities, your wealth, instead of accepting an invitation to participate in the kingdom of God? Are you so caught up in the mundane of life that you miss out on what Christ is doing around you? Think about that. Will your story be that you clung as tightly as you could to all the things that you eventually would have to give it up anyway? Have you noticed that We come naked on this earth and we live naked. Nothing is put in your coffin. You leave it all here. Or will your story be of a man and a woman who surrendered everything that came their way because they realized it wasn't even theirs to begin with? Will your life and will your story be a story about my way or God's way? My will or thy will? And the reason there's a tension is because we are human, we like to take control, and there's a little Herod in all of us. Early this year, I had my own share of darkness, literally, that really tested my faith and trust in God. I noticed I was having a problem with my vision. I'd walk into a room and tell the children, put on the lights, put on the lights. And I said, the lights are on. And then I was also having trouble driving, especially in the night. My hubby would tell me, okay, now we finished our life group meetings, which sometimes end late. And he'd say, okay, let's go home. And I'm telling him I can't drive. So I thought, all right, maybe it's time to change my spec wearers, and I'm sure you understand that a time comes when you need to change and upgrade your prescription. So I went and got my eyes checked, and I was told, okay, 2 weeks from now, come and pick your specs. So I went, I picked my specs, I put them on, and I couldn't see. If you're a specs wearer, you'll know that when you wear your specs, there is immediate clarity. Lines are sharper, and it suddenly looks like the room has been washed. But I did not see that clarity. So I told that lady, you know what, I can't see. And she told me, just go home with them. 2 weeks and you'll get used to them. Now, within 2 weeks, I realized I could not do the tasks I was previously doing. I could not read my WhatsApp messages. I could not read my email. I could not edit. I could not read. My work evolves around reading and editing. I couldn't do any of those tasks. And then I began having floating objects in my field of vision. I'd have carved lines where lines are straight. So, when you look at a window, like those lines, grid lines, they were carved, convex, concave shapes. That was very scary. And then the vision was blurry. So to cut a long story short, I went to see the ophthalmologist, and she told me that, I'm sorry, you cannot go home. You need to be admitted immediately. Wow, okay. Suddenly it became a crisis. MRI, lumbar puncture, I don't know how many tests were done, and there was nothing being found. They said, okay, I think we'll take you to India or to UK for diagnosis. And people prayed. My relatives, my sister-in-law, my parents, my mother, life group, Pastor Emmanuel, everybody was praying. And that day, they discovered what it was. You see, a doctor cannot solve or manage an illness until he knows what he's treating. They had no diagnosis for the week I was in hospital. And finally, they found that there was a bacterial infection in the optic nerve. Do you remember what the optic nerve is? Biology. Optic nerve is the nerve between the back of the eye and the brain. How it got there, I have no clue. In fact, they said it was tuberculosis of the optic nerve. And most of the doctors had never even heard of it. So there was misdiagnosis all through. And so it was a time of darkness. And I want to just say today that even reading this script is a pure miracle. There's been progressive healing. And I can stand on this podium and read this script without a pair of specs. It's a pure miracle. And I want to really praise God for that. Your darkness, as I had said, could be years of unemployment or chronic illness. Whatever it is. Imagine you have been invited to AM Live with Kobe Kihara or on Morning Express show on KTN. How would a journalist tell your story? Will your story show that in the midst of darkness, in the midst of your pain, in the midst of suffering and brokenness, you submitted to the light of the world? Will it be evident that you let the light shine through your darkness? And John says that darkness, represented by Herod here, cannot put out the light. Whatever we are presently going through cannot be overcome. Will you let the light shine through your darkness? Will you let the light shine through those challenges? Will you let Christ shine into your dark situation? I want you to think about 2016 Christmas. What will it bring out in you? Will it bring out the best of you? Will you be like the wise men? They bowed down and they worshipped. They submitted and surrendered to the toddler king. Wise men still seek him. The wise men were men of high position. They were important. Yet they put on hold their daily activities, their businesses, their kingdoms, and traveled long distance to prioritize seeking the Messiah. Have you already blocked off your 2017 calendar to ensure that you have adequate time with Jesus? When about 5 years or 6 years ago, we used to minister with Shiko Kanyotu, and then we'd remove our goals for the year. And she would ask, spiritual goals, what time will you be doing your quiet time? We'd compare, what time are you doing your prayers? So I would challenge you, could you prioritize time with the Lord? Prioritize your quiet time, your worship nights, third Friday of every month. They are fantastic here. Prioritize your Sunday morning church services. Prioritize your spiritual retreats so that you have an opportunity to connect with him and to seek his direction. Or will this Christmas bring out the worst in you? It brought out the worst in Herod. Will you instead give in to your desires, impulses, indulgences, seeking to please your own desire rather than to please God? Perhaps at some point you've wandered away from the church. Maybe you had a bad church experiences that pushed you away. Or maybe you went to college and you just quit believing. It just wasn't part of the routine and you just drifted slowly. It happens very slowly, away from your faith. Or you got busy or you got hurt. Maybe some tragedy happened. You lost somebody you loved, yet you had prayed and God didn't answer your prayers. And you said, really, God? If you're not interested in my level of pain, why should I pay any attention to you? And you turned your back on him. You thought you were done with God forever. I don't know what your story is, but here's what I know about your story. If your story was my story, or if my story was your story, I would imagine I would have responded in exact the same way. In the midst of your darkness, in the midst of doubt, anger, bitterness, disappointment with God, in the midst of sin and the shame that it brings, you started to miss the peace and the joy. Despite everything you have experienced, you sensed a light out there. I want to suggest to you that in the darkness, there is still a flicker of light, a spark, an ember. The darkness cannot overwhelm it, cannot overcome it. The darkness cannot blow it out. So I urge you this Christmas season, would you consider reconnecting and re-engaging with the light of the world, the light of Jesus? Jesus Christ is the light, and he wants to shed light into your darkness. Would you take a step, engage for the first time with the light of the world? No matter what you have done, no matter how far you have wandered, no matter what sin you have performed, and no matter what kind of shame you are involved in, that light is not going out. Christ continues to shine his light and invites us to re-engage with him. Let us push past our resistance and excuses, and like the wise men, let us bow down to the light of Jesus. Because Jesus, the light, changes everything. I'd like to invite Pastor Kevin, please, if you could come forward.